Hi guys, today we're going to go over a little bit about setting up the laser cutter. The laser cutter itself will be a separate video. This one I just want to go over some quick primary working with Corel Draw. Corel Draw is our primary software that we work with. We could work with Adobe Illustrator, I believe it's on this computer, but I don't have a whole lot of experience with that one to start, so we're not going to worry about that. I have already created a new screen here. Unfortunately, with the setup right here, I can't directly capture this screen. So I'm going to give you basic overviews. In the future, we'll go over what exactly is going on. But for now, I'm going to just create a new one so I can show you what's going on. I am very important. Give your drawing a name. The reason why I tell you to do this is when you send it the actual finished project here to the laser cutter, if you don't name it and it's untitled, and somebody else also didn't name theirs and it's untitled, you'll end up with a whole bunch of entitled projects in the laser cutter queue and you won't know which one's yours. So give it a name. This one we're going to do 101 tutorial. If I'm lucky, I spelled it right. The biggest things to know on this first screen is primary color mode. We want it to be RGB, red, green, blue. It's how the laser cutter works. One of the things people run into a lot is instead of RGB, they leave it on CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, I don't know, Krylon. I don't remember what K is. So they leave it there and everything looks right, but when they send it to the laser cutter for processing, it doesn't work, which is unfortunate. So we can fix that later, but it's easiest if you just set it here now. The next thing here is the width and height of our wood. For my example, I'm going to be using a different one. Typically in the lab, we've got essentially 20-inch wide by 12-inch tall pieces of 1/8-inch Baltic birch plywood. We use Baltic birch because it doesn't have any knot holes or anything in there. It's a solid material, so wherever we cut, there's no voids. It also lasers well. We can get it locally. Does come straight from Russia in 5x5 sheets, which is a little weird, but it's just how it is. However, in the process of cutting it, we have a thing called a kerf for a saw. Kerf is essentially how wide the saw is, so even though I could, using a laser, cut it almost perfectly, when you use a saw, we lose a little bit of material. So instead of 20 by 12, excuse me, we use 19.9 by 11.9. Essentially what we're doing here is we're just telling it it's slightly smaller than what we hope the part is. So we've got that set. I usually set this as landscape mode. That sheet won't go in portrait mode in our laser cutter. Our laser cutter, I think, is 27 inches wide by 18 inches tall, so it's not quite large enough for that. And resolution of 300 dpi is fine. So we'll hit OK, and we should see a screen like this. Nothing overly exotic. For this one, I am actually going to change my height and width a little bit. I'm going to leave this as actually the way I have it set up in there, it's 8 inches wide. I'm just using a piece of scrap. I have a collection over here of miscellaneous scrap pieces from other projects where there's more there. We don't want to throw away what's left, but it's not a full sheet. So I'm using some scrap. Let's go ahead and make something basic. Usually we'll import something into here from probably Onshape is the best way to do it for you guys. But I'm just going to make something quick. So I'm going to drag out a little box. Okay, little distraction there, but let's start over. Anyways, so I'm just going to start with something pretty basic here. I've made a little square on here. For what I'm doing, I'm not going to worry about the size, but we're going to set the first layer up here. Typically, we use red as our cut color. You can see when I left click on the red there that it fills it. In Corel Draw, we actually want to right click and it will change the outline to cut. So yeah, red is typically our cut color. Now I'm going to go ahead and put down some text. Let's go ahead and do something like this. In this case, we don't need anything too exotic. But I'm going to go ahead and get this in here. And let's see, let's do something a little bit larger, and let's choose something interesting font-wise. Some things laser cut better than others. It's kind of a little bit of an experimental process. Make this box a little larger. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and center that just so it looks good. And for what we're doing, that'll work. So once you're done, we're going to go ahead and click on the cursor here. I'm going to choose this whole thing, and I'm actually going to right click, and I'm going to convert it to curves. Text, this is pretty important. It helps out with how it imports into the laser cutter. And now I can move it around if need be. We'll center that up a little bit more, something like that. Because I'm going to engrave this part, I wanted this black. There is some flexibility in what we do with all of this, but we'll start with that. Ultimately, this is just about ready to go. So once you're happy with what you've got, I usually recommend saving it. And then we're going to print it. So you can either do File and go down to Print, or you can hit the print icon up at the top, or you can hit Control P, whatever works best for you. And then we're going to go to our printer, and we're going to change our printer. It defaults to either OneNote or the local printer, but I want to use the Rayjet engraver. And that will choose this. Looks good there. We may want to adjust that in a moment. Then on color, we're going to click the color tab. Make sure it's on the Rayjet engraver. This just makes sure that it's the proper RGB. And then I'm going to go to layout, and this is an important part that a lot of people will forget, but we need to set where our cut is on the piece of wood. So I'm going to do reposition artwork 2, click the drop down, and I'm going to do top left corner. And this will hopefully drop it in the top left corner of our part. This way, when we align the laser over there, it will start right where the laser is. I like to hit apply, and we're going to go to general, back to general, and I'm going to click the little gear icon here next to printer. This can take a moment, and it pops up a separate piece of software, which is where we can set all of our settings. A lot of these we keep as defaults. We can do different materials on the laser cutter besides just wood. I'll show you a couple of those when we actually demonstrate the laser cutter. But for now, I'm going to use wood birch. I'm not worried about the thickness or autofocus. But I have black set as engrave. I always want air assist on. And for this, I'm going to do about 80% power and 100% speed. This is a pretty quick machine, so that will go through the engrave pretty quick. Engraving is the single longest thing you can do on a laser cutter. If you have a large detailed thing such as this, it literally goes like an old dot matrix, side to side, back and forth, and this could take 15-20 minutes. So keep that in mind, depending on what you're doing. Then here I'm going to click on the red button, and this is set as cut. Cut is what we want. We're going to use 75% power and 2.3% speed. Cutting's a lot slower, but usually you have to do less of it, so it still goes pretty quick. Once again, we want air assist on. Once we're done here, we can click next. And there's not too much here we want to change, but I just want to touch on a couple things. Process, we always want as normal. Stamp will automatically invert what you're doing. We want bottom-up engraving. What that does is, as the laser is going across doing engraving, it starts at the bottom and goes up. The smoke is pulled to the back of the machine, and it can leave a little residue. So by starting at the bottom, we're never getting smoke in what we've already cut, which is hard to clean. You can just use a wet rag, but it's a lot easier to wipe down the smooth surface as opposed to the engraved surface. Resolution, just how fine it is. 500 is just fine for wood. We're not going to use the cutting table or rotary thickness. We don't need to set any of those. Half toning deals with specifically with rastering. I like air diffusion myself, but order dithering works well too. I'll let you guys play with this. That's all we need on this screen. The next screen is really just a sanity check. Make sure that everything looks like what you expect, and then we can hit the play button. Once you do this, nothing happens. It does not send it to the laser cutter. We're really just setting it up. If you're doing a few things in a row, you only have to do that once, but always assume that somebody else did something different than you, and you want to go through and check all those settings. So once we're done with that, I'm going to end this video here, and then we'll restart the next one and go through the basic laser cutter and a little bit of this. Yeah, thank you.